What is up, guys, and welcome to episode 21 of the Dad's Life podcast. I'm your host, Sean Flack 2.0, and in today's episode, we are going to be talking about the most influential man in my life, my dad. So before we get into it, obviously today is Father's Day, so thank you for all the dads that are out there handling their business, taking care of these kids, making sure we can do the best we can to make them successful in life and be, contributing, responsible adults, and just doing the best they can, doing the best we can to make them as successful as we can make them. So anyway, thank you, all the dads out there, all you positive male role models. Thank you for doing what you're doing. Today is your day. Celebrate it, enjoy it, relax, because guess what? Tomorrow's Monday, and you're going to be out there hustling. So anyway, thanks for taking time out this week to go ahead and listen to today's episode. Again, we appreciate you. I can't thank you guys enough. All right, so let's just get right into it. My dad was 52. My dad was an older gentleman when he had me. Now, from the stories, and again, what I share with you is what I know through stories from other people or things I've heard from relatives, now obviously, and things he's told me. So there are going to be some things that are exaggerated. There are going to be a lot of things that are going to be real, and basically solidifying the fact that just because you're a good dad doesn't necessarily mean you're perfect. So my dad had me when he was later. So just imagine in 1929 in the Philippines and the hills of Cebu. If I get this wrong, don't kill me, but he was from Bohol. Now, I don't know too much about the Philippines, but he was born in the mountains. And at the time, you actually didn't get a birth certificate until you got christened. So he didn't get christened until like 3 years later. So if you took a look at his birth certificate, it said he was born in 1932. But in all actuality, he was born in 1929. He was also a farmer. His dad, my grandfather, was a farmer. And in the Philippines, and especially during this time, if you were born a farmer, you were going to die a farmer. My dad didn't want that. So when he was old enough, he actually left the farm and he went to the city and became a mechanic. He worked on cars, and then he eventually got into heavy construction as a heavy equipment mechanic. So just kind of like some trials and tribulations through doing that, when my father was in the city, he sent his dad had sent my uncle to come get him in the city and say, hey, he needed, my grandfather needed help back on the farm. And my dad said no. My dad didn't want the life of a farmer. He was very serious about it. When he got into mechanics, he worked for this company called Black Construction. And back in those days, I believe that was during, one of those, wars that are famous for something. They had these things called H-2 workers where they would draft, or I wouldn't say draft, but they brought people over from the Philippines over into the Pacific to build barracks. And my dad got into that, doing construction for, like Guam and Hawaii and building barracks and things like that for there. That's when he met my mom in Guam, and my mom's Chamorro. So they met in Guam and, fell in love and had kids. And then, of course, by this time, my dad already had, by the time, he met my mom, I want to say my mom was very young. I mean, I don't know how it was back in the day, but my dad was definitely an older gentleman. He met my mom, they fell in love, got married, had kids. Unfortunately, as the story goes, my mom had epilepsy and she passed away of epileptic seizure. Before then, though, we went from Guam. My sister was born in Guam. Then me and my brother were born in Hawaii. Then we ended up in Tacoma, Washington. And in Tacoma is when my mom passed away. So, it was either 3 months. I was either 3 months old or 3 years old. I guess it depends on who's telling the story and how well my memory is, which it's not that great. But she did pass away, and my dad had to raise the three of us by himself. Now, again, I always going to refer to, as to my understanding. Now, if there's any of the relatives that are out here listening to the show, first of all, thank you for listening. And again, this is to my understanding and from what I know. And if there is any corrections that need to be made, please, please, please don't be afraid to reach out about this. But again, this is the way I look at it and my interpretation of what I saw and what I've heard and what I pieced together. So I guess at the time, and again, I'm probably going to romanticize this because, just because I think that's how it went. But anyway, my mom knew she wasn't going to live to see us grown. And so this is not something I didn't find this out until I was 18 and we took a road trip back up. But regardless, my dad had to raise 3 of us all by himself, and he was a mechanic by trade, so he kept mechanic jobs, and he owned his own body shop and his own car shop, and worked in he was a body man by trade, but he did work on engines, so he was a mechanic as well. And we moved up and down the West Coast. I want to say we lived in Long Beach. We lived in, Richmond, California, Oakland, California. We lived in LA. We lived in so many different places. And we ended up settling down in East Oakland. So, growing up, we were poor. We were always on WIC or Social Security or something like that. Would come out and check on us as far as our well-being and make sure we're in school. And those are the main things I can remember. And I always kind of as I look back, I was damn, dude, you're an ungrateful ass little shit. But anyway, I was well, why are we poor? I asked that question, why do you need me to help you and do all this, and this? And, my dad, he didn't know how to answer, but, basically got mad at me and was I need your help to do this and do that. And it was doing stuff in the car shop. So I learned how to be a body man and a mechanic and mechanics and engines. And we used to break down engines in 6 hours. And, we used to redo full, body paint, restorations on cars. And as a kid, I'm this stuff sucks. And growing up, that's what my life was. It was me helping him, my sister helping out, all these different things. And I always wondered, why were we so poor? And, I wouldn't say I was resentful, I just didn't know. There's kids that had stuff that we didn't have. And, again, you're a kid, you kind of question these things. But when I turned 18, there's a bunch of things that happened between me being a kid and turning 18. I'm not going to get into full details, but we ended up going back to see my mom's grave. My aunt came down, and we ended up going to go see my mom's grave in Tacoma. And then, and I'm going to share this. This is definitely one of those defining moments in my life. Some stuff happened, and there was this big fallout, and I kind of didn't talk to my aunt for so many years. And again, there was history, he had 2 lives before he had us. So I was, again, not knowing the full situation of stuff. And again, I regret the lost time I had with my aunt. And by now we kind of reconciled and, are talking through Facebook and stuff like that. But I didn't know. So anyway, I'm a deacon in the church, and my dad wanted me to say a prayer. We went to go see my mom's grave. And one of the things that I said was, I just hope that, my mom wouldn't have been disappointed in our lives. I wanted her to be proud that, our lifestyle and what my dad was able to, provide for us. And, I just wanted to, point that out. And my dad, he started crying. And I didn't know why. He started crying once I said that. And, I ended the prayer, had, everybody was leaving, and my dad would call my mom Bae. And so I'm sitting there waiting for him, and I'm hearing him have this discussion with my mom, and he's saying, Bae, I did it. I kept my promise. I brought them back. Your youngest is already 18, and I just wish that, I did you proud. That I raised them the best I could, and that was good enough for you. And he kept his promise. Now, again, I could be romanticizing it. This is how I remember it, and this is how I want to keep remembering it. But in that point in time, all the stories I knew of my dad, he was a Rolling Stone. Like, he had a total of 11 kids with 7 different women. Now, why did he keep us 3? Because he kept a promise. And maybe that was a promise that my mom made him keep or made him say. And again, that could just be my romanticizing it. And he kept it. And he said, through all the hardship that we had, he was going to keep us because that's what his obligation was, and that's what he promised to do. And he did. And that act of honesty or enlightenment on my end, like as far as like what the real is, as far as the honesty part, like I didn't understand these things, but growing up. But when I turned 18, he basically brought us back to my mom's grave and said, I did it. I kept my promise. And from then on, like, he had disappeared for like 2 months after that trip. Like, nobody knew where he was. But he fulfilled his promise. He brought us back. He brought us all back. And, we saw my mom's grave, talked to her, and that was it. He was like, I'm done. Like, I did what I was supposed to do. They need to kind of do their own thing. And so, to me, that was like, oh my God, my dad was a dad. Like, my dad was the dad. Like, he could have pawned us off on my aunt or whoever else decided to say, hey, my dad's not good enough to take care of kids, let alone a girl and 2 boys, especially with the reputation he had. He was a womanizer or whatever the case was. He can't raise kids, and he made a promise to do it, and he did it, and he fulfilled it. And then he left. Because he was like, I'm done. Like, I did my part. I kept my word. So, flash forward however many years later. And, my dad, he moved to Arizona. And he wants me to come to live in Arizona with him and help him out in his property. He had bought like 40 acres for like super cheap. So, he was just living off the grid. And he told me, hey, come out, come help me. I need your help. I'd appreciate it. And at one point I was contemplating it, but then, I had let him know that, I had got my girlfriend pregnant and I was going to be having a son. And so the conversation went from, well, why don't you come move to Arizona and help me out, to, you know what? The only obligation you have in your life at this point is your kid, is your son. Nothing else matters. You decided to make that decision, and now he's your obligation. Nothing else matters, not even yourself. And so he stopped asking. And the only thing he asked me to do was to take care of my son. And he said, I'm going to stop asking. I don't want any help from you anymore because you have an obligation. You have to take care of your kid. And so, witnessing what happened years ago and the promise he made, him being older, him being 52. He was twice my age. I had my son when I was 23. Twice my age, and he raised 3 kids. Like, the only thing that went in my head is my dad did it twice my age with 2 more kids. I should be able to do this with 1 and half his age. So that was like that very first piece of advice, that enlightened moment when we went up there to Tacoma to see my mom. And yeah, that enlightenment and, kind of like the struggles I was going on through life. And then, his change of tone from, excuse me, his change of tone from come help, come move, to like, no, the only thing you need to worry about, there's nothing more important than you taking care of your kids. And kid is what he said, but eventually I'd go off and we have 2 more. So was like that starting advice, like, hey, go ahead and handle your business. Like, that's a decision you made, that's a promise you made, if not to someone else, to yourself, that you would take care of that responsibility. So kind of going what we went through and knowing that life could have been completely different, but my dad took on his obligation and his responsibility so serious enough to the fact that he brought us back to my mom, and it really affected him as far as like making sure he did the best he could and that she wouldn't be disappointed in what he was able to provide. And so that right there was like one of the defining moments of like, my dad's a dad and he really understands what's really going on here. So me and my dad, we weren't always eye to eye. Like I definitely wasn't the black sheep of the family. I definitely was like, the daddy's boy situation. But there were a lot of things like we kind of didn't get along, and I always asked him a bunch of questions about different stuff, and then he would just be like, "Boy, you don't need to know. It's none of your goddamn business." And obviously, I'm going to be marking this episode explicit because I am talking about my dad, and some of the stuff is real crazy. But he wanted me eventually to help him write like one of his memoirs, and he, would tell me these different stories about different chapters in his life, about how when he left, he made he left the farm, he made a conscious decision to never go back. And he said, when you have that type of resolve, you're going to be successful. And even though his brother came to bring him back and say, Dad needs you back at the farm, he said no because he felt he had a greater purpose. Now, did he hurt his family in that process? Maybe. I forget if he was the youngest or the oldest son, but he had bigger aspirations than being a farmer. So he had that resolve to like leave everything he knew to pursue something he didn't, and to travel across the Pacific Ocean to pursue a life he knew nothing of, and then be successful here in his own right. And it's just a journey of like overcoming. And again, I'm thinking I'm romanticizing a little bit more than making it more glamorous more than it actually is, but that's the way I saw it. That's the way I see it. So anyway, and when he told me that story, like when his brother came to bring him back to the farm, he was like, you make your own path. Like you do what's good for you. You do what's good for your family. Regardless of what anybody says, that's one of those things that stood out to me as well. Like he was defiant, and back in the day, you weren't defiant to your parents. Still you shouldn't be till this day, but back in those days, being disowned was a big thing. And so he just said, you kind of, blaze your own trail. Like no matter who it hurts, if it's better for you, you have better ambitions, and then you go with that. And that was one of those lessons that he taught. Again, it stuck out in my head. He was also a womanizer. He told me some crazy stories about, mind you, this is back in, the 40s, the 50s. He was telling me a story about, he had got into his girl and he tossed her down the stairs, and then like she was crying and he just stepped over and walked out. Like, my dad was not a saint at all. He wasn't like a good guy all the time. Like he had basically 2 lifetimes of experience before I was even born. So there's so many things that, they're appalling and they're like, oh my God, some of the stories he shared. But I have to believe that by the time he had us, he had made mistakes and he learned from them and he wanted to redeem himself in some way. And that's why things kind of turned out they did as far as with our childhood. So, in order to be a great dad, or, that instance kind of taught that lesson. Like you have many chapters in your life and you don't have to be a proud of all of them. We're not perfect. In my eyes, he was a very good dad. I look back and like he was an amazing dad. But I know growing up, I didn't think he was. Like, I'm like, why are we in this shit all the time? And, he's had chapters in his life that he's not proud of, that when we talked about it, he was very, remorseful for it. So, as to say, what, just because, what they say, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future, to me, he was the best dad in the world, but he wasn't perfect. And that's okay. So if you're kind of going through your own struggles of being a dad and, making sure, or you're not too proud of what's going on in your life, you still have a future. You wake up on the right side of the dirt every morning. You can have a chance to make it right. So one of the things, him talking to me and telling me these stories, and then of course again experiencing what I experienced with him growing up, you don't got to be perfect to be a dad. You just got to be there. You got to care. You got to, and it's okay not to be proud of everything you're doing. So, be a trailblazer. Do what's best for you. You're not always going to make the right decision. And just because you did make the wrong decision today, as long as, you have the resources to wake up and you're not in jail and, you have a chance to make it right and to make it right in somebody else's eyes. Like, you got to live with what your bad choices were. And so in some people's eyes, you will never be good. But, as long as you want to go out there and redeem yourself, you can, as long as you wake up every morning. And so those were some of the things that like stuck out in my head. And then, he would tell me, when he was in the as an H2 worker, in the islands of Hawaii and Guam, he'd hang out with all the military guys to where people thought he was military, and he wasn't. And one of the funny stories is like he's hanging out with his military guys or whatever, and this is just something I think is funny. But people would ask him, like, and of course ladies would ask him, well, what, boat are you assigned to? And he'd be like, oh, I'm assigned to the USS Never Move. And it was like a running joke between him and his military guys and his military friends. But I thought that was hilarious. He's like, oh, yeah, the USS Never Move. And, they would play it off like it was a real ship. And from my understanding, I don't think it is a real ship. But anyway, just some of the jokester stuff that, he would do. And then he would, like, do his own impressions of, the gay sailor. Like, I remember the first time he did it. I can't even think to do it. But, he was just... they're just drinking and having a good old time, and then he would go into his little impression of the captain and all this stuff or whatever. And he would always talk about his good times that he had while he was, doing that island hopping from the Philippines to the U.S. So yeah, I mean, my dad was definitely an eclectic person. Like he worked on cars. He had us work on cars growing up. My appreciation from cars comes from him as well. And at the time, I was like, man, this stuff sucks. But now I look back and I'm like, oh, I know the difference between the V6, inline 6, V8, I could appreciate horsepower, wheels, like all these different classic cars. Because of him, because, he pushed us to kind of like help him out in his shop, and I hated it, but I look back and I'm like, you know what? I'm actually happy that he did. So we're going to flash forward all the way up to when I got married. And, the son was living with me. They came out for our wedding. He came from the Philippines for the wedding. And my wife and her friend had asked him some questions. And, the first thing I want to let, kind of like leave with you guys is about his thing on marriage. And if you have been following the blog, you can check out the blog. It was a blog about my dad. It's about the secret of happiness. But this is one of the stories that always hangs out in my head. And I've talked about it before in another podcast episode. But I want to bring it out here because it is the episode's about my dad. And one of the major things he had taught me, or he had explained to me and my wife, was that, we asked him, my wife and my wife's friend asked him, like, what's the secret of happiness? So he says there's no secret to happiness. You want to be happy, you buy ice cream. Like, go out and get some ice cream. Ice cream makes everybody happy. But everything else, in this particular case, we were talking about marriage. Like, what's the, secret to a long marriage? And it's work. The secret to a long marriage is going to be work no matter what. And the whole ice cream bit it was funny at the time, but it's true. That's a life lesson. You want, happiness, have some ice cream, have an ice cream cone. It'll make you happy. But if you want a happy, long lasting marriage, it's going to take work. So there is no secret to it. It's actually putting in the work. And don't get, go into relationships or situations with rose colored eyeglasses on. You want to make sure that you understand that it is work. And that you're willing to put in the work, and you're willing to, work with your significant other and to make things work. Because everything is not going to be unicorns and rainbows. Like, there's just going to be so many ups and downs, within the however many years you're together. It's just always going to be work. So, just a funny, the thing about long life and happiness and stuff. And So yeah, my dad was a character, and he was very influential in how I conduct myself as a father and what my expectation or standards are of myself as a father and what a father should be. And I'm happy and I'm glad. And yeah, he's still alive. He's still kicking. He's still in the Philippines, roaming around, doing what he's doing. And obviously, if he ever gets a chance to listen to this episode, I definitely want to let him know how much I love and appreciate him. And I haven't always been the best son, and that doesn't mean that you're never in my thoughts and my prayers and my, you know, just stuff. So anyway, I love you, Dad, if you're listening. Today's our Father's Day special, and I wanted to talk about the most influential person in my life, and that's him. I will leave with this story. I'll end the episode on this story. And, again, it's with my wife and her friend. And I guess it's kind of going into the whole marriage thing. But my dad, he has a wife and a girlfriend. And, they know each other. At least they did. Something happened. They ended up having to run into each other or whatever. And he's always had like a woman in a different port. Every port there was another lady. There was this, there was that. And so my wife asked him about that. Like, what's up with this, whole wife-girlfriend thing? And you know what he said? He said in old age, it's not about the sex. It's about companionship. And he said that women were his inspiration. And that's why he had to keep women around him. So that he could live forever. He could have long life. Because as long as he was inspired, he was always going to wake up. So, you could laugh at that. You could, be like, wow, dude's a player. That's game right there. Games to be sold, not told. That's his take on life. And, that could be a life lesson. Like, surround yourself with things that inspire you. That's going to keep you going. That's going to be, about being older and just being around people and not being lonely. And just so many different aspects come from that story that I could take. But he, he just said that women inspire him, and that's why he has to surround himself with them. So again, player, game recognized game, but at the same time, there's a lot of insight with that. There's a lot of, as we get older, our priorities change, and we just want to be with somebody. We want to be accepted, and I think that's, as we get older as parents, we're in bed by 9:30. I mean, when we were younger out there, running these streets, we were leaving the house at midnight. So, priorities change, and that's all right. And, surround yourself with things that inspire you. Now, of course, don't think you're going to be an OG like my dad, because my dad is triple OG. How he had the girlfriend and a wife and, all these other companions and sources of inspiration, I'll say. And you think you're going to do that because, they don't make them like they used to. And, I don't think there are too many women out here. So, yeah, that's a little bit of insight of what, drives the expectation to be like. And, my main thing is, we're not perfect. We're trying, and our priorities change as we get older. Life situations change financially, situationally, people out here losing their jobs left and right, homelessness. I mean, just things change. And the one thing that doesn't is a dad. Somebody that's going to be there, to number one, you're dad because you got kids. And you take care of them and you do the best you can for them. And you usually, the better you do for them, in turn, what I've learned through my journey is that when you put them first, above yourself, not necessarily above your significant other, but definitely above yourself, that you yourself will elevate. You want to do more, you want more for your kids, you in turn are going to do better, and you're going to put yourself in a better situation because you want them to be in a better situation. Now, when you're talking about marriage, you can't necessarily just always put the kids first. In my experience, and again, I am not a professional psychiatrist or whatever, But there's a lot of different gears that go into marriage that definitely go into, the role of being a husband and a father. And a lot of times you definitely, in order for the kids to have a solid, stable foundation, you got to probably put your significant other first and make sure they're happy, because when the parents are happy, the foundation is solid, that's going to be a solid base for the kids to build on top of. So yeah, I kind of got deep here in the end. But, if you guys want to share any stories about your dad, hopefully, maybe you found something funny in this podcast or something like that. Don't forget to, like, subscribe, share, leave me a voice message here on Anchor FM. If you're on like Google Podcasts or, Apple Podcasts or whatever, don't forget to like, share, let people know what's going on with the podcast. If you found any kind of value listening, and if you're not a dad, or you are, and again, you're listening just because you're here to support me as a person, share it. Look for those people that are struggling being dads in your situation, and let them know you appreciate them. Let them know you appreciate them every day, and not just Father's Day. So anyway, with that, I'm going to go ahead and signing off episode 21 of the Dad's Life podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe. You could find me on Twitter. That's at Sean Flack. If you got on Facebook, Sean Flack 2.0, you could go ahead and join the community there. We're not too big, but again, I do try to share a lot of dad life stuff and just some inspirational things, because as dads, there's a lot of things that could bring us down, and there's not a lot of support. There's not a lot of positivity, things like, hey, great job. There's a lot of out there for moms, but for the dads, they're few and far between. So I want to celebrate you guys every day there. Obviously, you could head over to SeanFlack.com for web access to this show and all the other content. That includes the blog, the YouTube page, the other projects I'm working on with, some friends. Head over there, show some support, leave a comment. Don't forget to share. And I'm not doing this to become famous. I'm doing because I felt the need. I felt there was a need for someone to tell Dad every day of the week, thank you. Because I know it's not easy. Anyway, thank you for listening this week. My name is Sean Flack 2.0. You just got done listening to episode 21 of the Dad's Life podcast. Look for some new changes. We're going to be doing a computer build. I got my best man, best friend coming this weekend. We're going to rebuild the computer. Hopefully we get better equipment to bring better content to you. And as always, thank you. And I will see you guys next week. Peace.